Thank you, Mack, Julion, President of the National Association of Letter Carriers, Branch number 11 first. On behalf of our members and the officers of Branch 11, I want to welcome you all to our home, the James E. Worsham Building. Consider it your home away from home. This is a home of labor tonight, so we welcome you. Also, I want to thank the Chicago Solidarity Campaign for putting on this forum. I think it's imperative that we share information like this and we become informed. You know, Melissa brought the ideal to me, and anyone knows Melissa, she's full of ideals. I didn't shy away from this because, you know, there is so much going on now, particularly with the austerity and how all this stuff is interrelated. So I thank her for hosting this forum. Let me acknowledge a couple of my brothers and sisters in the struggle. The president of Des Plaines, Mr. Louis Rivas, Branch 2076, National Association of Letter Carriers. Vice presidents from 825 Elmhurst. They have every office that's out in the suburbs. Marie Didier, vice president, and Bill Shores. You know, I get probably the biggest challenge for me, and like I see she's watching the time, is keeping this within 10 minutes for those who know me. I have time? Okay. I can't do anything in 10 minutes. Well, actually, you know, what I have to share with you, I know many of you have heard to some extent already, but actually it never ceased to amaze me anytime I'm talking about the crisis that's going on with the Postal Service. There are those who hear this for the very first time. You know, whether we're doing a TV show or we've been on CLTV, myself, the Vice President Mike Cariff, for radio shows and getting out talking about what's really ailing the Postal Service. You know, because when you think about it, it's quite obvious, right? I mean, we live in a technological age. We live in an internet age. We live in Blackberries, iPhones. You know, we're doing everything by emails and Facebook and Twitter. Think about it. You know, be honest, it's okay to share this with us. When the last time you actually sent the letter, right? I mean, you still mailing, right? But yeah, for those who are not paying their bills online, I mean, our Postmaster General has been a big advocate of the internet lately. He said, why mail a letter when it's free on the internet? That's the CEO of our corporation, you all. Well, anyway, you know, it seems quite obvious, but the reality is it is not the internet that's killing the Postal Service. The Postal Service, like any other corporation, has been making the necessary adjustments. In fact, you can ask any letter carrier that's here, and those who are not here because they're working later. We're working harder. We're working longer hours. We're working longer assignments because we've been working with the Postal Service to downsize and right-size our corporation, our company. And what we have to do is you have to go back to 2006, as Melissa mentioned earlier, and it's called the Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act. And let me share this with you. Now, you all booing and hissing. Back in 2006, we were advocating for it. We were telling you all to call your senators and call your congressmen because we needed postal reform. We needed to level the playing field. We needed to be able to provide more services to generate more revenue. And, you know, like the saying goes, be careful what you ask for because, you know, you're dealing with a Congress who, as with this Congress, tacked on an amendment. In the lame duck Congress, they tacked on this provision that required the Postal Service to pre-fund retirees' health benefits for the next 75 years. And they gave us a 10-year window to do so. That bill comes to something like $5.5 billion a year. Now, in 2006, even with the internet age, you know, we're in the midst of this internet age, the Postal Service was seeing record profits, record mail volume just in 2006. So, you know, even though we didn't like that provision, that was one of the provisions we didn't scream as much about as, you know, some of the others. But what happened? The economy tanked. The bottom fell out. You know, and we start seeing less mail volume. And this $5.5 billion really became a burden, an onerous burden on the Postal Service. So you would think, well, you know, quite naturally, let's get rid of this burden. But there are many politicians. I heard Senator Durbin say this the day after the inauguration to a group of Illinois out there in D.C. that he compared our situation with that of the state of Illinois, where they have this pension problem, and we're trying to prevent the Postal Service from having this pension problem in the future. And of course, then you hear other who are saying that, you know, the Postal Service isn't going to be around much longer anyway, because we have to face the reality. Let's cut services, let's cut days, because you know, everyone is on the internet now. That argument, of course, don't make sense when you think about it, because if you're trying to argue for the need to pre-fund retirees' benefits 75 years in the future, but the Postal Service isn't going to be here for another 10 years, what's the purpose, right? Okay, I don't know, just kind of thinking out loud there. But anyway, you know, the bottom tanks of the economy, this burden is starting to really drain the Postal Service. And, you know, we're at a point right now where, of course, we're seeking legislation to get rid of this burden. Now, as far as our pensions are concerned, the Postal Service, our pension, we have two pensions accounts, the Civil Service Retirement account and the Federal Employees Retirement System. Our Civil Service Retiree System, which is something that was ended in '84, or those who were employed in the Postal Service after '84, they got into FERS. But as far as the Civil Service, this goes back to the Postal Reorganization Act. And what was happening after that time, the Postal Service was funding the pensions for the Civil Service Retirement System. Come to find out, they were overfunding it. The Office of Inspector General did an audit, an independent audit, and came back and told Congress, well, you know, the Postal Service have overfunded the Civil Service account by some $75 billion. $75 billion. Of course, Congress didn't want to hear any of this, so, and I believe it was during one of the congressional hearings that they had another audit done. They had another independent audit. This independent audit came back and said, you know, well, no, we believe they're wrong. The Postal Service didn't pre-fund or overfund this pension to the tune of $75 billion. They did so to the tune of only $50 billion. Now, on the other side, we have the Federal Employees Retirement System, and the Postal Service now have overfunded that by some $12 billion. You have these two pension funds, which are overfunded. You have a retirement, the pre-funding of these retirement health benefits that have some $40 billion in it right now. In fact, the fund that they're setting aside for our future retirees is just that. It's for the future retirees. So those employees who are retired now, they're not even accessing these funds that we're putting away for them. So you see all of this, this burden that's put on the Postal Service, with the obvious objective is to make this public institution fail. Why would they want this public institution to fail? Well, I'm glad you asked. The Postal Service is generating some $65 billion in revenue annually. $65 billion. Boy, there's a lot of people who would like to slice that pie up. $65 billion. You know, we're a network, an intricate network that delivers to every address in this country every day. You build it, you're trying to hide from somebody, you go to the top of the mountain, guess what? The Postal Service will find you, and we will deliver that letter. If you're at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, we will get on a donkey and we'll get down there and we will deliver that letter. If you're on the other side of the lake, we have letter carriers who will canoe over there to get that letter to you, because the Postal Service is an institution that is guaranteed in our Constitution, that we have postal roads, and the Postal Service is required to have a post office in every community in this country to keep this country bound together. One of the basic public services that we have. You have someone of the federal government in your community every day. You know, and that is something to treasure, and that is something to maintain. In fact, we are so effective at what we do. So many people compare us to UPS and FedEx, and in terms of if we were more efficient, because you know they're raking in billions of dollars annually. Well, they're doing so because they depend on the Postal Service. We deliver 25% of their goods every single day, because we go places where they don't go. You see brown all around Chicago, but you go down to Odell, Illinois, or even Atlanta, Illinois, you're not going to see brown there. These are small communities. It is not a cost effective for them to go there. So they hand it off to us, and we do what we do best. We deliver. You see, and I just want to kind of tie this in quickly, because I know we want to get on to allow some feedback here to this whole austerity issue. And, you know, the depriving those who could least afford it. A couple years ago, when I was speaking to some of the local politicians and trying to get them on board and getting this message out, you know, I spoke with Alderman Ed Smith, and, you know, he pointed out the obvious. He said, you know, everyone's talking about people are paying their bills on the internet and everyone's doing things on the computers. He said, there's not 200 computers in my ward. See, he's on the west side of Chicago. And sure enough, when the Postal Service started talking about making cuts to services and closing facilities and even closing post offices in the neighborhoods, they didn't look at those communities who, you know, for the most part, they're saying we don't use the Postal Service. They looked into the communities that could least afford it. And those communities were the west side of Chicago. They identified every post office on the west side of Chicago for closure. 2 on the south side of Chicago were in the Inglewood community, Inglewood, Ogden Park, Chinatown, where they got out there and they rallied hard. I mean, they occupied the post office that day. You recall, we were out there. I mean, but you know, that's of course is what we have to do, because this is a war. You know, we talk about the racism that's associated with it. You know, I look more so as the class war. You know, during the last election, every time, you know, we're talking about tax cuts and the rich and the poor, you have this faction screaming about class warfare, class warfare. Well, hell, the class war has been going on for a while, and it's those at the bottom who's losing. You know, so each time that we're talking about, each time there's talk of a tax cut, you're actually giving tax cuts to the rich while you're taxing those who can least afford it. Because these tax cuts deprive local, state, even federal government of resources. You know, if they don't have the resources for the public schools, if they don't have resources for public transportation, what do? They raise the fares. And who's impacted by this? Not those who are driving around in Lexuses and Mercedes, no. Not those who are on the top end of the social ladder, is those who are the lowest. So they're being taxed because now they have to pay more in transportation because they're going to raise the fares. They're closing schools in what neighborhoods? You know, not the neighborhoods where they can afford to send their kids to private schools, but those neighborhoods that can least afford it. And who can least afford the most basic form of communication? The neighborhoods in the inner city, in the rural communities that will be devastated. I mean, really devastated by the cuts that the Postal Service is proposing. Interestingly enough, what's kind of keeping us afloat to some extent in the argument in Congress is the fact that those who are usually the faction that are against us, they will be the one impacted just as well, because as I mentioned, the Postal Service is an intricate network throughout this whole country. And a lot of this country is rural. And a lot of them rural communities have people who they associate with red. So they don't want to see, they may want to downsize government, they may want to close post offices, but not in their community. You know, so, but that's why we have to fight back. We have to do what we can by any means necessary. I'm going to turn it over. I think I held it to about 9.5 minutes. So I thank you all for listening. Again, thank you for coming out.